to agree to this proposal. The Good Friday Agreement does mark the most significant political development on this island since partition. An international agreement, it involved the two governments and nationalist Republicans and unionist political parties in the north. It has provided a peaceful and democratic way to deal with contentious constitutional and political issues. It has opened up a new and peaceful path to the realisation of Irish unity and ending the Union where none presented before. However, the political process has been held back by continuous phases of instability since 2010. And this stems from the negativity, the disengagement and the mismanagement of both the peace and political processes by the present British government. And tragically, this approach has been mirrored by the Irish government's semi-detached approach to the north. Both governments have failed to honour their commitments to ensure full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and other agreements since 1998. A commitment made at Weston Park to investigate the murder of human rights lawyer Pat Finucane has not been honoured or implemented. In the St Andrews Agreement, a commitment was made to act in Gaeilge. This has not been honoured or implemented. There is no Bill of Rights, no All-Island Charter of Rights, there is no civic forum. And in the period from 2010, the two governments have stepped back from their responsibilities, and leaders of political unionism have refused to properly support power sharing in the north. And this has contributed directly to serious political difficulties and ongoing instability, particularly around dealing with the past, disputed parades, flags, symbols and cultural identity. Despite intense lobbying and advocacy by Sinn Féin, there has been a failure to implement the equality, parity of esteem and mutual respect elements of the Good Friday and other agreements. And this impasse led to the convening of talks by Richard Haas and Megan O'Sullivan in late 2013. Both the British government and the Unionists rejected the Haas-O'Sullivan proposals, and further political instability led to further political negotiations in November and December 2014 at Stormont House. Agus Balak nua Chontae a bhí so coan to Chuck, Crook and Anfa, agus tá dogus le fáil an go fáil. However, this difficult political situation has been exacerbated by the austerity crisis caused over recent years by the British government's reduction of the North's block grant by £1.5 billion sterling. And this has had devastating consequences for public services, for jobs, social welfare protections and economic growth. With the election of a majority Tory government in May, more is yet to come. Much worse is yet to come. Another £1.5 billion sterling will be cut from the block grant. An estimated £120 million per year will be taken from the pockets of working families as a result of Conservative cuts to tax credits. Current and policy atá ag na Tories and process agus na henchitúdi in Wales. It's against this background, with political unionism not playing its full part, some in that community contrived to create a real crisis following the murders in Belfast of Jock Davison and Kevin McGuigan. And this crisis was facilitated when a criminal investigation into Kevin McGuigan's murder morphed into an assessment of the status of the IRA by the PSNI leadership. And while the PSNI Chief Constable may argue that this was not a political intervention, the fact is that it is the responsibility of the PSNI to investigate criminality and to make those responsible accountable in the courts. And they should do this by following the evidence and are assured of the support of Sinn Féin in so doing. However, Sinn Féin will continue to strongly resist any efforts to bring what should be operational matters for the PSNI into the political processes. We reject totally and will resist any effort to undermine the rights of our electorate or any other section of voters. And this was the background for a cynical electoral power play between the two main unionist parties, which brought these talks to an effective standstill pending the publication of a report by the British government. Some elements of the British report and a parallel report from Garda Síochána were seized upon by opponents of Sinn Féin, including the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach and the Fianna Fáil leader, and misused for narrow party political agendas. There has been a deliberate effort to criminalise and demonise Republicans, Sinn Féin activists and other citizens, especially in cross-border communities in places like South Armagh and North Louth. So contrary to the Wild West image portrayed by some elements in the media and others in this chamber, let me state very clearly that the people of the border region are decent, law-abiding citizens. Let me also hold up to ridicule the absurd notion that there is a twilight zone in which the Garda collude with Republicans involved in fuel smuggling and so on as part of the peace process. This is patent rubbish. Let me repeat once again that Sinn Féin is totally and absolutely opposed to criminality of all kinds, and we stand with communities across this island and with Garda Síochána and the PSNI in opposing criminal gangs and criminality in all its forms. As a consequence of this, Sinn Féin members and our homes and our families have been attacked. Despite this, Sinn Féin will be to the forefront of any future initiative to tackle paramilitaries or criminality on this island. No other party has done more to build the peace, to reach out to others and to robustly face down violent loyalism and so-called Republican dissidents. I've also made it clear that Sinn Féin members are accountable only to our electorate. Sinn Féin has no fear of the electorate. We respect them. They are the people, after all, who give us our mandate. So despite the political opportunism and the cynicism which was evident in the efforts of the Taoiseach to get the Assembly adjourned, and the entirely ham-fisted call by the Fianna Fáil leader for the suspension of the political institutions, and this cynicism which is again evident in the Dáil today, talks have recommenced in Belfast. This is very much to be welcomed. And wheel on, go Coran Dini Isteach or an dul Conceen atá Janta. Sin Dini atá agus a bhí agoni and I in process or fad. There is a widespread conviction, and let me tell you this, I spend at least 2 days, if I can, not always, in the north, and I spend most Mondays in Stormont. There is a widespread conviction that some elements within political unionism have pulled back from the political process and are not seriously committed to power sharing. And I make the case all the time that that is understandable, because if they have other options, they will take the other options. But if governments keep to their obligations and their responsibilities and implement agreements which have been raised, then these old guard have less room to manoeuvre. The British government position lacks credibility. There's no genuine intent to resolve the impasse. The very people in MI5 and the old guard of the RUC who produced the recent report have also brought in a veto to stop the families of victims of British terrorism from getting the truth about what happened to their loved ones. These folks are locked into the conflicts of the past. They are the same people who directed agents and informers and paramilitary organisations that killed hundreds of citizens, including citizens in this city, with the Dublin Monaghan bombings, and stirred sectarian violence and colluded in murder. And they are prepared to put the peace and political processes at risk in an effort to stop the growth of Sinn Féin north and south. These are the people some in this Dáil choose to believe. The Fianna Fáil leader does not believe the Garda Commissioner, but he does believe MI5. MI5, some in the PSNI and the British government have also attempted to use the new legacy legislation to elevate British interest above those of victims and their families. And victims' groups are seriously concerned about the British government attempting to roll back from commitments on dealing with the legacy of the past. They are anxious and upset following a meeting last week with British government representatives called to discuss the process and the progress of legislation on this issue. The British and Irish governments agreed at Stormont House on the need to provide justice and truth recovery mechanisms which will give disclosure to families of victims of the conflict. The British Government's legislation is in clear breach of this agreement. The legislation is about hiding the British state's role as a central player in the conflict and its collusion with unionist paramilitary death squads, and this is unacceptable. And people there, and particularly I'm sure the Minister for Foreign Affairs have met some of them, look to this government to stand up for them. All measures to deal with the past, including any legislation, must reflect the commitments made at Stormont House by the parties and the two governments. Because of the serial crises in the political institutions in recent years, their reputation and public confidence in them has been severely undermined. And it is the responsibility of the executive parties to repair this. But the responsibility of the Irish Government and of the parties in this Dáil should be to support the efforts to make progress, not to place narrow, self-serving party political objectives and opportunistic, untruthful propaganda above the necessary process of change and progress. Sinn Féin's priorities have been to ensure the efficient functioning of the power-sharing institutions while endeavouring to create jobs, reduce unemployment, to protect the most vulnerable and to bring forward working budgets that ensure delivery of frontline services. And I want to commend the patience and the fortitude of the Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness, in this regard. Martin has played a consistently positive role. And particularly, he's demonstrated an extraordinary willingness to reach out to others, whether within unionism or in the British royal family. So Sinn Féin wants the political institutions to work and to deliver for citizens. Despite all the difficulties, the Executive, the Assembly, the All-Ireland institutions have worked better for citizens than the years of direct rule by unaccountable British ministers or the decades of one-party rule by the Ulster Unionist Party. The British Government needs to accept the reality of special circumstances in the North. I know the Minister for Foreign Affairs accepts this. I'm uncertain if the Taoiseach does. The North is a society emerging from decades of conflict. It has always been a dysfunctional society. Partition has that effect. Both governments must accept the need for an economic dividend to the necessary process of peace-building and political and societal change. Both governments must fully implement the Good Friday Agreement and subsequent agreements. And the Irish Government needs to play a more active, I've made this point many times to the Taoiseach, and more constructive, ongoing, consistent role in the North. Citizens in this state expect their government to proactively pursue and promote the peace process. Citizens in the North, even those within unionism, expect the same. And all of us in this Dáil must work to break down partitionist mindsets. And this is a particular challenge, if I may say so, for the Taoiseach and for other leaders here. The Dáil itself needs to break out of a partitionist mindset. And it was an interesting experience to hear the Taoiseach mention partition in an otherwise unremarkable and barely coherent contribution. But this government needs to move beyond its occasional rhetoric about republicanism. Any government that truly wants to unite all the people of this island, including those who see themselves as British, in peace, in equality, in harmony, needs to work diligently and in an effective way towards that end. There's also a constitutional imperative and obligation on the government to do so. And this means pursuing every avenue to promote greater All-Ireland cooperation, means working to build relationships on the basis of equality between all our people, regardless of their background or tradition. And it's through building of the All-Ireland sectors as part of a single island economy, including the environment, health, energy, education and agriculture, that peace and unity will be established. We must use every available opportunity to utilise the goodwill of our international friends, including those in the United States, and Sinn Féin is deeply committed to that mission. It also means proactively reaching out to unionists. Crucially, the Irish Government must end the practice of playing junior partner to the British Government when it comes to the peace process. The government here has to see itself as co-equal guarantors and deal with the British government on that basis. Anything else is a recipe for failure. The British government cannot be allowed to set the agenda and the pace of negotiations, or indeed the scope of discussions. And I have urged the Taoiseach here many times to prioritise his engagement with the British Prime Minister with the objective of stabilising and sustaining the political institutions set up under the Good Friday Agreement, but also of delivering on the separate responsibilities and obligations of both governments. A 15-minute phone call, an occasional on the margins meeting every so often with the British Prime Minister is not good enough. It needs consistent strategic involvement on an ongoing basis. I'm sure the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I note the positive nature of Sean's contribution here, I'm sure the Minister for Foreign Affairs will vouch for the fact that Sinn Féin is currently working positively with all the political parties and with the two governments. But the Taoiseach must, as co-equal guarantor of the Good Friday and other agreements, engage with the British Prime Minister with greater focus and consistency. We need to accept that the peace process is bigger than party political point scoring or narrow electoral considerations. As I've said here before, this is a time of change for the British Union, and this has major implications for the North, and that is also in itself destabilising elements of unionism. The issue of Scottish independence has not gone away. It remains a live political issue with obvious implications for the North of Ireland, and be sure that unionism is watching that space very, very closely. And while Sinn Féin is highly critical of elements of the European Union, including the lack of democratic accountability, the narrow ideological pro-austerity focus and the failure to deal with the humanitarian crisis faced by refugees, the prospect of increased or full withdrawal by the British state from the EU, or the significant erosion of human rights protections, also has major implications for Ireland, North and South. So all of these issues argue for the Irish Government to be fully and consistently engaged in a strategic manner in keeping with its constitutional obligations as well as its responsibilities under a series of agreements. There is a clear onus on the Government here to contribute fully to the development of the I-5, to the Ulster Canal, to the bridge at Narrawater, as well as other capital projects. This has been made clear by both the First and the Deputy First Minister. The British Government must also face up to its economic obligations. And while the British Government will never accept its role as a participant in the conflict, the Irish Government needs to insist that it does. British political and economic policy has to change if we're to see political stability, proper commitment to real power sharing and to sustaining the institutions, which requires, and let's have no doubt about this, a workable budget. Without a proper budget, the Executive cannot deliver the economic dividend that is required. And today's bad news about the job losses at Michelin show the challenges that face working people. There have been important contributions within civic society which should not be ignored. They include punching above our weight by the CBI, growing the economy and living standards by the Unite Union, the substantive Irish Congress of Trade Unions submission to last year's Stormont House negotiations, and the content of the recent Equality Coalition conference in Belfast. So to conclude, a Cathaoirleach, our opponents here lecture us on the need to build trust. At the same time, you patronise, you insult, you engage in the most vile, offensive and untruthful invective against us and our party. Let me assure you that Irish Republicans need no lectures from Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or Labour. We will work with you. We know the business of building peace is challenging, but that is our priority. In the short time available, we need to see energy, we need to see vision, we need to see inspiration. In short, we need to usher in a new phase of the peace process, and that is Sinn Féin's focus.
Now the next speaking slot is